Freaks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is my slightly belated October reading wrap up. I did actually write down the list of books last weekend but didn't get around to it, and I've been sort of lethargic all of this weekend, so it's a really late night recording. Last thing I'm doing this weekend. So you've probably seen a bunch of these books, all the physical ones at least, because of the readathon, but I shall go through anyway. So actually, the first thing I finished in October was a Pride and Prejudice variation called Five Gentlemen at Netherfield by Lara Bikendig. This one was a case of, it wasn't just Bingley and Darcy that came to Netherfield originally. There was also Darcy's cousins and other friends, who all have different opinions of the Bennet ladies. So that changes interactions with everybody. So then we have Scorpion Queen by Mina Fears. This one is an African-based fantasy novel set, when I looked it up, it was about the 13th century, 12th century, something like that, in which we have a girl who has gone from being wealthy to a servant to the princess because her sister blamed certain things on her which weren't true. She wants to run away with her love interest, but she can't see him because she's now a servant. The princess is having to deal with the torturous process of anyone who wants to marry her has to go and find some mythical thing in the desert, and if they come back they get boiled alive in a great big kettle, and so far 99 men have been boiled alive in said kettle. However, a map is found, a plot is hatched in order for a suitor who turns out to be our main character's love interest, sort of by accident, sort of not. In order to survive the kettle, they're going to go and try and steal the hammer from the god of the forge. And the map is following. And so they have various adventures, and it ends on a cliffhanger. And there's a lot of betrayal, and yeah, so I'm not real pleased about the fact that it ends on a cliffhanger. And there is currently no second book. So decent read, not crash hot about the ending. Then I reread The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I read this for uni a few years ago, having heard about it a lot and just never got around to it. However, I've never got around to the other 3 books in the series, so I decided to reread this one in order to prepare myself to read the next book, which I have bought but on Kindle but have not actually read yet. So I haven't started it. I've got a few things in my pile of Kindle reads to do. So, excellent book, very profound sometimes, cozy space opera, space travel, lots of queer rap. Love it. Then I finished A Wealth of Women by Alison Alexander, which is a non-fiction book that essentially traces and records the lives of ordinary women in Australia from 1788 to the present. There is an essay in the back of the book by a different author, which is about the lives of Indigenous women. And there are a couple of sections that do talk about queer women. Just trying to find... by Prue Tawny Parlicki, that's the chapter on Indigenous women, and there's some small sections in other chapters about queer women, but it's, yeah, and it finishes at, like, it says to the present, but it's actually to 2001, which is the centenary of Federation, which this book was commissioned for. I also read Opie Battles the Space Pirates by Donna Marie Hansen. This is a little novella, which has a corporate executive who is secretly trying to track down and destroy space pirates, and things go a little bit wrong. And there's a romance, of course there is. but it's a fun space romp. And I also read selected poems of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, translated by Anne-Marie Schimmel. So these are some short little poems from a poet who was born in the Afghani region and ended up living in Turkey. So they're sort of Islamic poems, but not just Islamic. There's romantic poems in there. It was a fun little read. So yeah. So those are a very quick run through of what I had read for the readathon. Then I read What If Jane Was Married by Grignard, and this is a collection of 3 shorter works of 3 different examples of what happens if Jane was married when the Bingley party arrived at Netherfield. And so in a couple of them, things don't particularly go well for Jane. Let's just say Mrs. Bennet's choice of marriage partners for her daughter is still not great. But yeah, the experience of having Jane married makes things very different for Elizabeth a lot of the time. Then I read Mr. Hurst's Return by Jan Rowland, and so this is one where instead of staying in London and dealing with his very, very annoying sister-in-law, Mrs. Bingley, Mr. Hurst quietly leaves town and goes to Netherfield and makes friends with Mr. Bennet and gets to know the Bennet women a lot better, which means he's then in a position to, although he doesn't like meddling, give sound advice to certain other gentlemen who end up turning up again. Then The Gardeners Take Charge, which is the latest in the Take Charge series by Shana G. And so we have the very, very sensible Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, who essentially take their opportunities to impose more sense on the Bennet household when everything is falling apart. As soon as they get an opportunity, they arrive and try and better everybody's lives. So that's fun. Then I read The Repercussions of Extreme Pride and Prejudice, also known as Mr. and Colonel and Mrs. Fitzwilliam, I think, which is an older Charlotte Grant. It's someone that I'd never gotten around to reading before, and is one where initially Lizzie ends up married to the Colonel. I think, if my memory corrects me, not entirely by choice. He's very fond of her, but there's a compromise that, yes, that's right. There is a compromise, which is made worse by, he's merely trying to comfort Lizzie because she's just received some bad news. But Mr. Collins sees them, screams, draws attention. So she has to marry the Colonel. However, the Colonel is still, they are going, Anneberg actually asserts her inheritance, but because she's unable to have children, she's going to leave Rosings Park to the newly married Mrs. and Colonel Fitzwilliam. And so Lizzie is living with her, but the Colonel is still honour bound to go back to his regiment and fight on the continent. And yeah, things take a turn. And then the final thing I read in October was Uncanny Magazine issue 55. This was the final issue for 2023, I think. I don't think any of the stories really jumped out at me. There was, I think, at least one that I had already read for the Hugo Awards. Was it that one? Or was it the one where the first story is a story by an author I do not read for reasons? She's a very well-known author that I used to quite like, and then she did a thing, traumatized me, and I refused to read her anymore. Yeah, so but that was Uncanny issue 55. I really need to start catching up because, like I said, there's an entire nearly 2 years more of Uncanny, and I'm actually in the middle of issue 56 at the moment. But it's always interesting reading. Even if nothing jumps out at me, it's always still interesting reading really good quality diverse fiction, even if it's not always to my taste. Science fiction, fantasy, essays, and poetry. So always worth reading Uncanny Magazine, even if nothing in particular jumps out at me. So that is what I read in October. It was a total of 11 things. And it was a little bit more diverse than I had been reading lately. There were still Austen variations, but there were 2 books that were by authors of non-Caucasian backgrounds, and at least one that had very prominent queer characters. So, plus Uncanny Magazine, which is always diverse. So yes, quite pleased with my reading for October. I'm not doing too badly so far in November, and I do need to actually check where I am with my diversity goals, but I know I'm ahead of schedule in the number of books, so for the year in total. So yeah, there's some interesting reading in my future. I will see you all again really soon. Bye.